Dear students, today the lecture is about healthcare as a human right, a core pillar of global health, with the following learning objective. First, it is to understand the core principle of human rights. Second, it is to describe the history of human rights. Third, is to assess the importance of human rights-based approach to healthcare. Lastly, to explain the violation of human rights. As an introduction, I will start with the definition of human rights. A human rights contain two words. First, a human is a member of the Homo sapiens species. It can be a man, a woman, a child, a person of any age, race, origin, or nationality. A right you have is something to which you are entitled to or allowed to, and guaranteed because you have the freedom to use. There are many types of rights that apply to certain groups, such as the automatic right to work when you are a national, but need a permit when you are a foreigner. And in many countries, not even all foreigners can get the benefit of every type of jobs. It is regulated by national laws. Now, the combination of words human and rights define rights you are entitled to simply because you are human. This means that this is how you can expect and deserve to be treated as a person. They are the only rights that apply to everyone, everywhere. This is why they are universal and independent of race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, age, sex, intelligence, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity, political belief, or any type of beliefs. And I can go on. There are many human rights. Total, there are 30. And you have the right to all human rights, and not only to a portion of it. If you don't benefit from all human rights, then your human rights are not respected. This is why human rights are interrelated, independent, and indivisible. A country cannot say, I sign for this right and not for this other right. A country cannot apply them to a portion of the population, but they have to apply to all the population, all human rights to all people, at all time, regardless the race, the religion, ethnicity, age, sex, etc. Let's explore the story of human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was created by the United Nations in 1948 to provide a global understanding of how to treat individuals, but it was a long journey to get there. Remember, 1948 was the aftermath of the recognized atrocities of the Second World War. I added the word recognize to atrocities, and I will explain why later. Several stages in history were necessary to reach the point for humanity to recognize the necessity of creating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and led by people with great courage to resist the injustice embedded in the non-recognition of the human nature of a group of humans by oppressors in position of power, led also by the compassion of the human instinct to engage in empathetic solidarity. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights represents an effort to reach out to our fellow humankind. We have talked about the modern human rights, but the story of human rights begins in 536 before Christ. As recorded in the Sirius cylinder found by archaeologists in a room in Persia. Persia is the current Iran. You can see on this slide, we consider this cylinder as the world's first charter of human rights. And the first article recorded are parallel to the first 4 articles of the current Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Sirius cylinder tells the story of how the first king of ancient Persia, current Iran, called Cyrus the Great, won all the wars, conquered other countries, and created the largest empire the world has yet seen. And in this vast territory, freed all the slaves, declared freedom of religion for all, and racial equality, which is the basis of the current human rights. This means somehow, far in our past, some human rights were guaranteed, but since then, a lot of atrocities happen across the world. From Persia, the idea spread to India, ancient Greece, and the Roman Empire. And philosophers start to think about the laws that people were following naturally. And this concept of natural laws arose. Natural laws is the observation of the fact that people tend to follow certain unwritten laws in the course of their lives. However, natural laws do not protect citizens and are not for everybody because they don't consider all humans as equal. In the same society, there were slaves, considered as commodities by masters that had the legal right to slave them, to kill them, or rape them. These natural laws were protecting only the wealthy. There is another important step in the story of human rights. The Magna Carta, or also called the Great Charter. Conceived in 1215, it is the first charter that protects landlords in Europe against abuse of a king within the feudalism system. King John of England was forced by the nobility to sign the Magna Carta because the nobility were tired of his abuse, based on the idea that the king was above any law. The Magna Carta guaranteed church rights, access to justice, protection from for the barons against illegal imprisonment or taxation. It is a very important document in the development of the human democracy, but concern only kings and landlords, not the rest of the population. A complement to the Magna Carta was in 1628 the creation of the Petition of Rights, produced against the abuse of another king, King Charles I, as a statement of civil liberties against his abuse. It applied that the king or the state could not deprive any individual or property or freedom without needing to justify why. During a long period, essentially from the 11th century, the bourgeoisie comes from the word bourg in French, meaning city. So, after the 11th century, the bourgeoisie emerged, composed at that time by rich people living in cities without land and without noble title, but having an economic power coming from trade. Beginning of the 16th century, after a long period during which the idea of separation of socioeconomic status and right began to take root, a man called John Locke, born in 1632, created his theory of natural rights, which are life, liberty, and property. It is also in today's understanding of human rights. It is the right to be treated as a human, and so substitute at that time the religious ethic with secular ethic. Remember, power was given by God to the king. Now the idea is that we don't take orders from God, but from ourselves. In summary, before the king was made king by the right of God, and John Locke's idea was that God gave the right to the people and not to the king. He gives authority for the first time to the people. However, the people in this context were not all the people again, only the well-off. It was an improvement concerning the non-noble rich people, and it was more based on trade and economic power. Around that time, an important intellectual movement called Enlightenment also emerged and was heavily influenced by John Locke. These factors together influenced the next phases of the development of human rights and also influenced revolutions across Europe, especially in France and England, but also in the US. In those countries, the concept of individual rights, the rights to self-determination and freedom, as right for all individuals, members of the society, emerged. John Locke influenced the revolutions in Europe and in US. His ideas serve as an inspiration for a variety of important legal conventions, including the US Constitution in 1787, the French Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen in 1789, where natural laws became natural rights, the US Bill of Rights in 1791, the Geneva Convention conceived in Switzerland in 1864 for the treatment of wounded soldiers and the protection of medical transport during combat. But none of these documents protected the people colonized against slavery, mistreatment, killing, and stolen and confiscated property. So, before the First World War, there was an evolution of liberty with the diminution of the total feudal power of a king, first with the Magna Carta in 1215, the nobility gained rights, completed later by the Petition of Rights in 1628 that gave the non-noble rich people the right to property, to self-determination, followed by the English Bill of Rights in 1689 that guaranteed election in Parliament and freedom of speech in Parliament, and no taxes without the Parliament. This led to the conception of the US Constitution in 1787, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789, the Bill of Rights in 1791, and the Geneva Convention in 1864. All these documents have influenced the modern Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the majority of them were excluding a big portion of the society, including women, people of color, members of certain social, religious, economic, and political groups, and there was still slavery. These documents were missing a big portion of Homo sapiens species. Between the World War I and the World War II, it is important to know that in the beginning of the 1900s, there was an emergence of a movement of social and collective rights. The people that were excluded started to say they were entitled to self-determination, education, employment, welfare, and public health. The internationalization of rights with the League of Nations, established in 1919, was the first worldwide intergovernmental organization created to prevent war and international disputes through negotiation and to promote some of the rights which were later included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and to support colonies of the Western Europe for their transition from colony to independent states. The last phases come from the atrocities committed by the Nazis and their allies during the World War II. That triggered the first international effort that was an attempt to control behavior of states vis-à-vis citizens by the creation of the United Nations system and its conception of human rights law, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. After the World War II, there were trials held in Nuremberg against the leadership Nazi in Germany for genocide of over millions of Jews, Gypsies, people of colors, LGBTQ persons, and persons with disabilities. Another trial was also held in Tokyo against Japanese who committed crimes against humanity during the World War II. However, the establishment of the United Nations started during the World War II, and it triggered the first international effort that was attempt to protect citizens against a state. And government committed to international peace and to prevent conflict created across the world, founded on freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of faith. The United Nations Charter was drafted in 1945 and a Commission of Human Rights was established in the UN. Dear student, we have reached the end of the first section of this lecture. In the second section, I will discuss the contemporary human rights. Thank you.